Hello, this is Arlo Kilpatrick, the Erudite Kinophile, and I'm continuing my series of videos on Hani Miletski's book, Understanding Bestiality and Zoophilia. This is going to be a video on Chapter 3, Theories and Opinions, in which she discusses the various psychological theories behind zoophilia and bestiality, as well as various other issues related to it, and what different opinions there are on the subject. I like that she both gets the opinions of zoos as well as medical professionals, although the medical professionals are perhaps less educated than you would hope. But anyway, let's continue on first with a discussion on mental health and zoophilia. The classification of zoophilia and mental health has changed over the years. This is most easily shown by looking at the evolution of the DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. In the first edition, it was listed as a sexual deviation under sociopathic personality disturbance. It wasn't listed specifically in the DSM-2, but the category of sexual deviations was there, including homosexuality among them. In the DSM-3, sexual deviations were replaced by paraphilias, and zoophilia was later explicitly added to the list. It was also still classified as a mental disorder until the DSM-3R, when it became a paraphilia not otherwise specified. This was fine until the DSM-5, in which paraphilias became undefined and were replaced by paraphilic disorders, which meant that these sexual characteristics were only problematic and required treatment by a psychiatric professional if they caused a person significant distress. I'd like to note here that this is similar to ego-dystonic homosexuality in the DSM-3, which was removed from the DSM-3R because homosexuality, even when unwanted, is not itself a disorder for psychiatrists to change. I can only hope that zoosexuality is on a similar trajectory to be recognized as a sexual orientation rather than a disorder, though I have no idea how long that will take. Many authors think that zoophilia is indicative of underlying pathological disorders, such as schizophrenia. Others claim that zoophilia is negative in other ways. For example, Davis in 1954 claims that bestialists generally can't find human partners, and that, quote, bestiality as a rule flourishes among the more backward and primitive peoples of the world. Bit racist that, but whatever. Plenty of writers hold that bestiality is a disorder to be treated psychiatrically or through the intervention of religious leaders. Others hold that zoophilia is only a concern when it is preferred over ordinary sex with humans, in which case it is pathological. Zoophiles themselves often do not see a problem with this, unsurprisingly, stating that it's a rare and harmless psychological condition, possessed by people who are ordinary members of society in every other respect. Interestingly, a few authors have found that bestialists are perfectly willing to share their experiences, if they feel they can trust the people around them enough to tell them. Matches my experiences on the internet reasonably well. Next section, reasons for engaging in bestiality. There are plenty of theories as to why people have sex with animals, but so far little evidence to support them. For more detail on this, obviously you can go to the source material itself, but I digress. Freud thought that sex with animals and children served as substitutes when the proper object could not be found. Many authors agree with this point of view. Others state that it's a sign of dissatisfaction with reality, or due to sexual immaturity. Still others insist that it's due to curiosity and experimentation, or imprinting earlier in life. I think the imprinting explanation comes closest, so I'll expand a little on it. According to Money and Pranzarone, each individual has a love map, which determines to which stimuli people are sexually and emotionally attracted. It is built during a critical period of life, say preteen or early teen years, and once formed, it is very difficult to change, so the theory goes. If, in their formative years, according to this theory, children have a sexual experience with a non-human animal, they are more likely than others to incorporate such animals in their love map. Another theory is that relationships with animals are far closer to the ideal of unconditional love to the zoophile than ordinary human relationships. This is only my opinion, but if I had to pick just one reason why I'm a zoo, that would be it. Other possible reasons include that the animals are themselves sexually attractive, and that their sexual characteristics are far better advertised and less hidden than those of human beings. In short, there are lots of possible reasons for zoosexuality, and there is not yet a consensus on any particular one, though the questionnaires sent out in Miss Miletski's study goes pretty far in explaining at least what the zoophiles would have to say about themselves. Prevalence of bestiality. Again, the data here are inconsistent, with some authors claiming bestiality is common and rarely discussed, and others that it is actually a rarity. There are those who claim that it's more common in rural areas than in urban ones, and with the greater variety and access to animals in such regions, this is probably correct, though I wouldn't bet on it. There are also plenty of rumors of bestiality in particular professions, such as the circus, or shepherding. There's plenty of studies on women and bestiality in particular, with some authors claiming that women take dogs to bed more often than men. However, in general, bestiality is male-dominated, both in terms of actual practice and based on their internet presence. There's not much data on what percentage of the population has ever had sexual contact with a non-human animal, much less on the prevalence of zoosexuality as a sexual orientation. Now we move on to animals' consent. Often, in arguments on bestiality, the issue of consent comes up. I've done a video on this already, and if you want more detail on the topic, please go ahead and watch that. Animals, so the argument goes, cannot be fully informed on sex, and cannot express consent verbally or in writing, or tell others directly about a case of rape, indicating that all sex with animals is non-consensual, and therefore abusive. Zoos often answer back that there are other physical ways for animals to withhold or signal consent, and that these can be used for animals in the place of verbal consent. I would add that verbal or written consent, though legally very useful, is both unromantic and difficult to prove without recording the activity, which most people are unlikely to do. Consent in human relationships is, more often than not, implicit, expressed through body language and innuendo, and though this doesn't override a verbal or written no, it serves as the kind of consent used by humans most of the time in sexual matters. There is more of interest in the section on animal consent, though much of it is simply what zoos have to say on the subject and has been repeated elsewhere. I'm more interested in the facts behind animal consent rather than the opinions of people who, let's face it, have a vested interest in animals being able to consent in the first place, so I won't repeat much of their arguments. I'll conclude my section of animal consent with the following comparison and contrast with pedophilia, which is sometimes mentioned in the same breath by opponents. They are the same, according to opponents, because they both involve non-fully informed subjects in asymmetric power relationships with adult humans, and both exploit this position for sexual satisfaction. According to a zoophile named Tanka, however, they are different in the following 6 ways, which I'll quote in their entirety with my own comments interspersed in them, because I think at least some of them are valid contrasts with pedophilia. 1. Children will almost certainly be damaged psychologically, while animals are not subject to social pressures. Though I think it's possible for an animal to be damaged psychologically if abused, the possibility is far more remote than for humans due to the animal's limited cognitive development and lack of concern for reputation. 2. Children are not biologically ready for sex, which can lead to physical injury. On the other hand, no zoophile will ever knowingly do anything sexual with an animal that could result in physical harm to the animal. Perfectly valid, this. 3. Children do not understand what is going on because they have not yet developed a sexual maturity, while an adult animal has a sex drive, often a very strong one. Undeniable, in my opinion, though one might argue that the animal's sex drive is being exploited to human ends in bestiality cases. 4. Children tend to be very easily coerced by adults. On the other hand, although reluctant animals can be pressured and trained to tolerate sexual acts, if an animal refuses to put up with sex, it can and will resist in a very obvious way. This is somewhat weak, due to the fact that domestication often makes animals docile and pliable to human intervention. 5. Children can be physically overpowered by an adult, while it is very difficult to overpower an animal. perfectly valid for the most usual cases of bestiality, large dogs and ungulates, but there are some rare cases where this is untrue, for example, sex with chickens. But with such small animals, the sexual activity would likely cause physical damage to the animal anyway, and thus would be immoral. Finally, number 6, children are not animals. We do not eat children or breed children for appearance or any other reason. We do not hunt children, do not perform medical experiments on them, and we do not sterilize children. Biologically incorrect, but I get the point. If we are unwilling to extend animals' rights in these situations, it would be hypocritical to draw the line at sex merely because that is an unusually sensitive subject. If we want to give them such rights, then that's fine, but in that case they should have the freedom to express themselves sexually as well, whether with their own species or with others. Since domestication has selected those animals with an affinity to humans, I wouldn't be surprised if given the choice many animals would choose humans as sexual partners, rather than their own species. The next 2 sections are somewhat short, so I'm going to be very brief in describing them. Animals crossbreeding. There's not much to say here. We've observed interspecies mating both in captivity and in the wild, and thus it is to some extent a natural activity. This doesn't necessarily make it correct, since rape and child abuse are also observed in other species, but if the animals are sexually attracted to humans through imprinting and other means, and human beings are attracted to them, what is the harm in allowing them to be together? Finally, bestiality and art. Not much to say here either, since it doesn't concern the facts on zoosexuality, but sexual acts with animals have been a part of human culture for as long as human cultures existed. The previous video on history of zoophilia shows that. Some recommended works include Balzac's A Passion in the Desert is both beautiful and down-to-earth. Woody Allen's Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask has a wonderful vignette about the love affair between a psychiatrist played by Gene Wilder. Actually, he was a general practitioner now that I think about it. And a sheep. For something more recent, though, Brian Griffin on Family Guy is a zoosexual in his own right, a dog attracted to human women, especially Lois Griffin. And this is used both as a running joke and as a plot point in a few episodes. There's also the movie Sleeping Dogs Lie, though that's more about the role secrets play in relationships than bestiality itself, which only shows up at the beginning of the movie, and really it's the characters' reactions to that fact that are the focus of the plot rather than the act itself. There are plenty of other examples of zoophilia in popular culture, but unless I get a request to go over them, I don't really see the reason to do it. After all, you can, if you're interested in the subject, you can probably find certain entries on TV tropes or Wikipedia or what have you related to it. So I'm just going to conclude this chapter, and next time we'll look into the various different studies that have been done of zoophilia before Hani Miletski's work. There aren't that many, and they're kind of unsatisfactory, but for the sake of completeness, we should examine them anyway. This is the Erudite Kinophile, signing off.